Welcome to the Arena Decklist podcast. I'm Jerry Thompson. Here with me from London is Brian Gottlieb. How's the trip been so far, my friends?
I am very much enjoying myself. Besides my seemingly never-ending battle with jet lag, everything has been fantastic. Although I will say we are recording this at about 9 a.m. London time. I got a good 6-7 hours last night, so it's starting to feel like I'm turning the corner in regards to my jet lag. Going to go to some museums and stuff today. Had a great meal in London last night. Went out with my wife. We had a really nice dinner. So everything has been very good. Thank you for asking, Gerald.
Wonderful. Yeah, dude. 9 a.m. your time, 1 a.m. my time, peak Jerry hours. It's great. If we could podcast at 1 a.m. every time, I'd be super down for that.
Yeah, maybe I just have to move to London. I mean, this is basically the most on-point timing for both of us we have ever found, because you tend to stay up much later than I do. I wake up earlier than you do. Usually we find our sweet spot right in the afternoon, 3 in the afternoon is our go-to recording time, but this works too.
Yeah, it's tough, even though we're, 20 minutes away from each other. We're in the same time zone, but don't really keep the same hour, so it's kind of awkward, but, I blame me mostly.
Well, we make it work. We find a way to put out that Arena Decklist content every single week. Lots of content this week. YouTube stuff. You doing all kinds of stuff over on the YouTube page in the past few days.
Yeah, I probably got to record some more content either today or tomorrow too. So that's a good reminder. But actually, this kind of ties in. So I knew that we were doing the podcast at night, right? And I finished my article early. Wednesday's normally article podcast day, and I'm just swamped. But I finished that early, so I had a few hours. You know what I did?
What did you do?
I built some Pioneer decks to bring to Command Fest DC. And a few weeks ago, I talked to some folks who kind of knew the format existed, knew what cards were legal and stuff, but they hadn't really thought about what sort of decks they could play. And so I was asking a couple people what their favorite decks were, and it's just on me to build updated versions of those decks and try and show people a good time. So I'm building a lot of tier 2 for Pioneer, and it's dope.
This sounds really cool. So basically you're just taking people's personal preferences and trying to work them into something new for the new format, right?
Yeah.
Anything really spicy thus far? What's your favorite?
Well, some of it is stuff I built myself. Some of it, one of the things I'm working on is Jeskai tokens, which was a thing I messed with at the very beginning stages of the format before it was very clear that the format was a little bit more powerful than that.
Yep.
But I feel Young Pyromancer, Goblin Rabble Master, Stoke the Flames, Jeskai Ascendancy, that sort of thing is going to be pretty cool. And then the deck that I just sleeved up before recording this is Fires of Invention Planeswalkers, which is also sweet.
Yeah, Fires is going to do something in that format. Can't wait to figure out exactly what it is, but that sounds promising. I hope you put together lots of YouTube content on this stuff and people can go check that out. And obviously we're dealing with a post-ban format now, so I do think things have gotten more open. This is probably the right time to figure out if these tier 2 contenders can step up and be tier 1 in the new format.
Yeah, a little more fair. And a lot of this is certainly bucket list consideration. We talked about the BNR on Twitch Monday, and then that got posted to YouTube a little bit later, and I've been doing some bucket listy type stuff for Pioneer. Yeah, it's been going well. I've been having a lot of fun just building decks, and I guess in case of the last one, Splendid Reclamation, Field of the Dead got banned, so maybe I'm doing something right.
Yeah, you got targeted. Obviously, that was only to address the Splendid Reclamation menace that was surely coming to take over the format.
I started 3-0 in that league, man. Deck was busted.
I think that deck is great, and I was very impressed when I played it. And I also ordered foil Splendid Reclamations. I'm not going to lie. I have just gotten killed on these foils. I need to stop. I really need to stop. This is it. It's just not working out recently. And I know that. I am not mad at anyone. I have been purchasing cards for a format that is very clearly unsettled. So it's all on me. But yeah, bad beats.
To be fair, the Once Upon a Time stuff, it's oh, this is good in Standard too, and whammies, You still have Modern, though.
Still have Modern for now. I mean, I'm not even sure that's going to last, so we'll have to see how that goes. Certainly much safer there. I'm not immediately worried, I will say.
Yeah, I'm going to be at Command Fest DC in the same weekend when Star City is running that. They're also doing the Players' Championship. Did you mess around on Twitter at all? Did you see the tier lists?
I did see the tier lists. What do you have opinions on them?
The tier lists are garbage.
Okay.
I think that, yeah, maybe they're not mean-spirited, but a lot of people probably did do them mean-spiritedly, if that's a word. I don't know. But it did lead to me and Edgar having a nice conversation, which could become a podcast episode or something in the future, just as far as like, I felt like a lot of people were ranking people how they thought the people were just like in general.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things I mentioned to Edgar was that like people should be ranking people on how good they are at playing against their peers.
Sure.
Because that's what this tournament is. It's not about, like, can you leverage the fact that you are better than your opponent? Can you extract max value from them? It's like, how good are you at playing against good people? And I asked Edgar that question because I was very curious and I knew that he would give me a pretty straight answer, and he did.
That is a great way of looking at it. And I think it matters a bunch. I mean, maybe my own bias shows here, but I have always said I play much better against good competition, and I don't farm weaker competition. It's not something I do well. It's something that's lacking in my game. You and I have talked a bit about how to fix that, and I am working on that. But there is a difference for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people just didn't really take that into consideration. Just the fact that like the tournament is hard and there are going to be people, like I think that there's maybe like 3 or 4 people I can think of where I'm like, I'm pretty sure this person is very good at it and they are the threats, and that's just how it is.
Sure thing. I think everyone has a chance to win this tournament. But
I do too.
I think it was Abe Corrigan who made the very salient point. I don't want to go too deep into these tier lists, but I will say he made a very good point that if Colin Roundtree is not high on your tier list, then you can pretty much throw the tier list out because they're just biased and focusing on players who have spent a lot of time on the SCG tour. But Roundtree should be near the top of any of those tier lists for sure. Yeah,
Colin's gas. Not a lot of people know him, but like he top 8 of the Hunter Burton Memorial Open earlier this year. He won the Invitational. He top 8 at a Grand Prix. Like he basically top 8's like half the tournaments he shows up to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I have had the opportunity to see him play, and just like hard read, he's very, very good at Magic. Very sure.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It's just he doesn't play in a ton of SCG events because he lives in Texas. Mm-hmm. So people don't really know, man, and they just don't give him any respect. And I think he's just gonna love that.
Yeah, they're gonna learn. I'll tell you that.
Yep. So yeah, I mean that'll be a fun tournament to watch. I don't know if we want to do anything specific for that tournament and like the format and the formats that people are going to be playing and stuff. Like maybe we could review the deck list or something. I feel like that would be kind of interesting.
Yeah, that sounds like a good show. If you all listening have something in particular you'd like us to do around the Players' Championship, you can let us know and we can figure out exactly how to best prepare you for viewing that. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to watching it. Not commentating it. I'm sitting this one out, but I will definitely be watching at home 100%. And another tournament coming up this weekend that I get to watch from home. Exciting times to be a Magic viewer right now.
MCVII.
Yeah.
It's 7, right? Not 8?
You got it.
It's
it
like
is MCVII.
You put a bunch of slashes right next to each other and I just can't tell how many it is. I mean, I guess in this case it's only 2, but it's still tough, man.
Yeah, I think we're nearing the end of this naming convention. Is that correct? Where we can get back to just naming things properly?
Who could possibly know that?
Okay, sorry. Impossible questions.
Anyway, we waited a little bit because we knew that the deck list and metagame breakdown and stuff would be up at this point. The metagame breakdown is in fact out. You can go to magic.gg/news, navigate that website if you dare. Otherwise, you can just listen to us. Number 1, you ready for this?
I'm ready.
Jeskai Fires, 18% of the field.
Expected. I don't know if it's right, but this is what I expected. I expected Jeskai Fires to be the most played deck.
I did not expect a lot of MPL players to pick this up. I expected this to be more of a challenger thing, and that's kind of what it looks like. It looks like it's 5-7, like 5 MPLs, 7 challengers. And it's also sort of not the most played deck because Jund Sacrifice is 13% and Golgari Sacrifice is 10%. And those decks are pretty functionally similar.
Yeah, it depends how you want to bucket them, but that's a fair point. You can certainly put them together, especially now that a lot of the Jund Sacrifice decks are just picking up Casualties of War as the top end. And I think that's correct, by the way. It's funny. I think it was Autumn who messaged me over in our Discord and was talking about how we just failed to mention Like you could just play casualties in Jund lists. We talked about it as very much a dichotomy. Either you play Jund or you play Casualties of War. And now that the Jund lists have picked up Casualties of War, and I think correctly so, I like the way they are set up for this tournament for sure.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I guess we didn't mention that explicitly. I guess it was just like, well, you have Mayhem Devil and you have Korvold, and like these are the powerful mirror-ish sort of breakers to the point where maybe you don't need casualties. But yeah, obviously it's a consideration.
Mm-hmm. And it has proven to be so. Well, we're going to go through each and every deck list, so we will talk about the players who chose to do so. But it seems like that was the MPL slant on this deck in a lot of instances. Although I want to talk about BBD's list too when we get there. He took an interesting approach.
Whoa, you looked at the lists already?
Oh, I looked at the list.
Dude,
you're going in blind?
Up. You just woke up.
Well, it's the first thing I did when I woke up. Look, I take my job seriously. I got ready. I prepared. I made notes. I have huge, like all the walls in my hotel room just covered in like the madman strings all over the place to understand exactly how this metagame works.
Last time you wanted me to go in blind, so I went in blind this time too. We planned ahead for this podcast and for like the varying time zones and everything. And I made the assumption that this is what we were going to do.
Yeah, we didn't explicitly talk about how we were going to approach this. I don't know. I wanted to see the deck list. What do you want from me? I got excited. I wanted to see what people were playing.
I did too. And instead, I just built Pioneer decks and just like twiddled my thumbs, you know?
Now you get to be like a kid on Christmas opening your deck list for the first time.
Oh, damn. All right. Jund Sac has 6 MPL, 3 challengers. The Golgari Sac deck is the flip side, 6 challengers, 1 MPL. Is there anything you make of, you know, whether or not MPL players or challengers are choosing one deck and not the other?
I don't know. I think it's interesting on a outlier scale, like when things swing really hard in one direction. I at least want to consider why that is the case. So something like Jund Sacrifice being represented 2-1 among MPL players versus challengers is interesting. Something like Golgari Sacrifice 1-5 or 1-6 represented anti-MPL players. That's really interesting. And then Simic Flash, 3 MPL players, only 1 other player in the tournament playing it. I think that is really interesting too, but only as like a starting talking point. I don't believe that just points you to this is correct, because these challengers are all very good at Magic and they can make the correct call in instances where MPL players are making the wrong call. That is not a disqualified possibility, and I don't want to present it that way. Just the fact that MPL is leaning hard in this direction does not make it necessarily correct. It is interesting, though, to think about how they could have gotten to that point. And a lot of it is like a bunch of these players work together, right? So they reach the same conclusion, and they all push in the same direction, and that's how you get there. Yeah. And there's nothing more to take from it than that. But it's worth mentioning and trying to understand how we got to this place.
Well, see, the funny thing is I kind of believe the opposite, where I feel like a lot of the challengers come in with 0 biases in a lot of the situations. And MPL players would play a deck like Jeskai Fires and be like, oh, this deck is too inconsistent, I'm not going to play it. And to me, it's like you see a lot of the same stuff with like Jund Sac versus Golgari Sac, where they're just like, well, I want the power and like all the good cards, and I don't need to like slim my deck down for consistency's sake or whatever. But I think the challengers and maybe like Croaky's is leading a lot of this, where it's like, I don't actually need the 3rd color. It does come at a cost. You know, the opportunity cost is certainly there. It is not that low. And he just found a way to be good against the other decks without needing that 3rd color. So I think that there's like 2 distinct groups, and you know, the information cascades and like hive mind stuff is like happening within each of them. And Golgari Adventures, another example of this, where like 2 MPL played it and 6 challengers played it. Where, yeah, I feel like that is, again, like a kind of like another streamer deck or like an arena deck. And then Simic Flash, Brad was at my place the day after Thanksgiving for like our Friendsgiving thing. And he showed me his deck list and basically told him that like Seth browbeated him into it or whatever. That's not exactly what happened. It was just like, basically he had no idea and not a ton of time. And Seth was just like, yeah, this. And like they started testing it, and it was just like kind of beating everything. Brad is skeptical, but does think that it's possible that Seth broke it.
Yeah, very interesting. We'll get into the specifics of that list as we talk about all of these.
Yeah. Izzet Flash, 4 MPL, 2 challenger. Rakdos Sac, 1 MPL, 2 challenger. Temur Rec, 3 challenger. Simic Ramp, 2 MPL, 1 challenger. Azorius Control, 2 MPL, 1 challenger. And then I think there are some other straggler decks in there, but like all of them are less than 4%. So overall, like a pretty good mix of stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting. I look at this and I see a lot of deck types here, but I don't feel a ton of diversity in the format. And I don't know what to make of that. I mean, I think a lot of it is just like there's a ton of stuff built on the same engine, and there's a lot of very similar archetypes working in the same space. And there is like a class of deck that is just completely excluded from this tournament for the most part, and that is just hard aggressive decks. They're basically absent. All these decks have capabilities to lean in a more aggressive way and slant themselves in that direction, but they aren't always doing that. And there's no mono white, no mono red, nothing that's just strictly focused on getting your opponent dead as fast as possible.
Well, maybe kind of spoilers. Like I said, I haven't looked through all the deck lists. I feel like there could be like a couple stragglers here and there playing aggressive decks, but you're telling me like literal zero?
I think it's literal zero, but maybe
Damn.
I am erasing one from my mind. I don't think so, though. There is like Rakdos Sacrifice deck that certainly slants hard aggressive, but I think that's it. I really do.
Yeah, that's not great, man. I mean, that does open up the format to potentially getting hated on by, one of the Flash decks, for example, or maybe Temur Reclamation if like people have found a good build for either of those decks.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes it kind of interesting. And then in theory, if those decks do succeed and do well, then the format can actually churn a little bit with a comeback of aggressive decks. But I don't know, like when does the next set come out? I feel like we've had this crap forever.
We must be close. I mean, this has been a long set. We've been through a lot, Gerry.
End of January. End of January.
Okay, so we've still got another 2 months, basically. Man, it feels like this set has been here for so long.
I mean, it's not been bad. It's definitely been interesting.
It's been bad. It's been very bad. Very bad. There's so many bans. How can you say it's not bad?
Well, so it is bad, right? I'm just saying that as a,
glass half full.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. No, just like an observer, right? Like I'm not really participating a whole lot.
Right. So it's not so much it's not bad. It hasn't been bad personally for you. I understand. That makes sense.
Well, it is. I'm just saying that it has been interesting for me as an observer. And like, granted, I had quote unquote tested for a standard PT and was playing a bunch of Pioneer and stuff. So like, obviously there are shakeups and I've like kind of felt that. But yeah, I mean, if I don't care too much or like put too much stake into my actual involvement in the tournaments, I basically do feel like an observer. And I'm just like, oh, like every week there's like something new,
Yeah, it's been forced in a lot of occasions by these ban calls. I will say it has made for pretty good content, and it's weird to look at things in this way. But over on YouTube, nothing hits better than our videos talking about bans. There's nothing people want to hear about more. So it's been farmable for us. I'll say that.
Word. All right, decklist time. You ready?
Let's do it.
All right, we're going through the deck list again on magic.gg. Appears to be alphabetical by first name somehow. So we get to start with Alexander Hain playing Esper Control. Huh.
This list is wild. This is a wild take on Esper Control. Was not anticipating this. It's something I worked on right after the bans because I did think it had potential. I am dying to hear Alex's thoughts on all of these cards. Literally every single card appearing in this deck. I want to know how he got to this place. It's like 3 elite guard mage, 1 hero of precinct 1. Then there's 2 Kenriths in the deck without access to red and green, obviously. Maxing on the Planeswalkers.
There's Bolas's Citadel.
There's Bolas's Citadel as well.
Citadel Kenrith is nice.
Yeah, good little combo there. I wonder how hard you're leaning on that. That's a good endgame.
I mean, it seems like the endgame, right? It's like if you get to play Kenrith for free off the top of your deck, you're going to have, 7 mana open. You get to gain 10 life. If you have a bunch of spells in a row, you get to play all those spells. If not, you can pay 4 to draw a card. Like Kenrith Bolas's Citadel is actually really good.
Yeah, there's life gain in spades in this deck. Oath of Kaya also being used as one of the key removal spells.
Yeah, worth noting, 0 copies of Kaya's Wrath. Alex does have 3 Island and a Castle Vantress. that do not cast it. He has one time wipe, but no sweepers. And I think that makes a lot of sense, especially when we're talking about a format that basically does not have any aggressive decks.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a really good read, like just spotting that there's no aggressive decks. I will say, I'm not sure how hard you're punishing these like engine-y setups. Like one of the things that really appealed to me about Esper Control and why I wanted to push to try it was I still think Planar Cleansing is a really strong card. And look, if you're playing Casualties of War, Planar Cleansing is just like ultra Casualties of War in a lot of instances. Alex, though, playing no copies of that card whatsoever. So a different approach, a different read on it. And with more creatures, you can understand why. And you do have your Bolas's Citadels. But I am surprised by the absence of that card. This looks interesting, though. I want to see if Alex came up with something really special here.
Yeah, Alex leaning on Drown in the Loch, which I think is quite good. I mean, it gives you Counterspell Doomblade Split card. It is a counterspell that still does stuff if your opponent has a Teferi. And then Alex also has a D-Spark main and 3 D-Sparks in the sideboard, which are super good against Jeskai Fires.
Yeah, that card is strong. But another big pull towards Esper, I believe.
Yeah, it is kind of weird, though, where you did well with the Dance of the Manse deck and had Disenchant because you forgot D-Spark was a card, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now Disenchant against like Witch's Oven and Trail of Crumbs actually seems legit, but like Alex has Sorcerer's Spyglass instead, so like also a pretty reasonable option.
Yeah, when I was rebuilding Esper Dance, I actually ended up back with the Disenchant in my deck, which if people followed my first foray into that deck, it was something I hated the first time I played it. And then I was like, well, wait, now I think it's actually correct. It was not then, but interesting how that has changed.
Yeah. Yeah. Alex's deck, and I mean, just Alex in general, I think is always a player to watch. But yeah, his deck is definitely interesting.
I like him going off the beaten path too. When I think of like how he first made his inroads, his deck choice was often very different from his peers. And then it feels like in recent times he has fallen in line a little bit more. So it's good to see him off taking his own path again.
Yeah, top 8 Pro Tours with Tron and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
All right, next up, Alexander Stayer, Jeskai Fires, a lot of 3-ofs, Cavalier of Flame, Fey of Wishes, Cavalier of Gales, Sphinx of Foresight, Kenrith, Bone Crusher Giant, 27 land, couple Aether Gust main. I feel like Aether Gust main deck is largely going to be very good in this tournament, but, you know, then there are certain decks like Alex's Esper deck where it just doesn't do anything, so that'll be interesting.
Yeah, I have a feeling it's probably only blank in like 10% of matchups, which I think that's enough where you're just safe playing it. One of the interesting,
agreed.
One of the interesting splits between the Jeskai Fires lists is the inclusion of Fey of Wishes. It seems like most people are of the school of passing on the card for the time being. Here you see Alexander Stayer still using the Fey of Wishes package in the sideboard, and this is painful for me to admit, but I would pass on Fey of Wishes right now. You know how much I love that card. It does not seem that you are getting the meaningful impact from your sideboard that you did previously. I would rather just have a functional sideboard in this metagame.
And it's also interesting that Stayer's sideboard has Casualties of War, Chandra, Awakened Inferno, Solar Blaze, Time Wipe, and Planar Cleansing, just like a lot of different sweepers. And I guess like Liliana Dreadhorde General too. So 2 Sorcerer's Spyglass, 2 Mystical Dispute, basically like the only real sideboard cards, although you could certainly just board some of these cards in naturally.
Right.
But yeah, you lose a lot of equity by doing that, and then things happen to the main deck where you just have to play like 3 of all of your creatures, basically, and I find it hard to believe that that's right.
Yeah, the creature slot looks really, really odd in this instance. I would prefer like a hard committal to, okay, this is the setup I'm looking for, not a little bit of everything. But we'll see how this differs from the other Jeskai Fires lists as we move through those.
Yep. Next up, Allison Mano, Golgari Adventures, Paradise Druid into Questing Beast, Thrashing Brontodon main deck. Love that. 3 Vivian, 1 Liliana, 1 Garruk, 25 land. Duress in the sideboard. Really like Drillbit in that slot. I know that a lot of people were like debating that up until the last minute. I do think that Drillbit is the call. But other than that, I mean, this deck looks solid. What do you think?
I like that this version of this deck is committing more in one direction. I think there's really only 2 viable directions to take this deck at this point. It needs to look like Allison's deck, where it's slanted a little bit more aggressive with Vivian Arcbow Ranger, or it needs to be built around Lucky Clover, because the mid-range version of this deck in the absence of Lucky Clover, I think it doesn't keep pace anymore.
Agreed.
So pushing more aggressive is fine for me. Personally, I'm getting sold on the Lucky Clover versions. I think they have found a configuration that looks really good. And if I was playing Golgari Adventures, that's what I would play in this tournament. But this seems like a fine approach as well.
Worth noting, Allison Mano, green-black, 0 copies of Casualties of War in the 75.
Yeah, well, you're just leaning on your aggression, right? You have a way to push through damage with Vivian plus Questing Beast, and I think that's fine. You don't want to go long against the Cat Oven decks. That is your plan. Just get them dead. And as long as you're committed to that plan, that's fine. And we see the way Allison has built her deck is committed to that plan of aggression.
Yep, exactly. And I like that. I do think it's worth noting that does not always have to be your plan. And just because the card is good in the format and you're green and black does not mean that you have to play it, especially if you have a plan to do something else.
Mm-hmm.
Flip side of things, Allie Warfield also playing Golgari Adventure, but with 4 Lucky Clover, 3 Casualties of War, and doing like Beanstalk Giant Smitten Swordmaster chains with Order of Midnight.
This is the other side of the equation. This is a version of the deck that I do think can play the long game successfully because you do generate so much value from your Lucky Clovers, and you can go big with Casualties of War. And I'm fine with this approach to the archetype as well. Like I said, I'm getting more and more sold on Lucky Clover builds as time has gone on. They are just capable of doing really, really powerful stuff. And they function without your Edgewall Innkeeper. That was my biggest problem with the Golgari decks, is that Jund Fires was so good at dealing with Edgewall Innkeeper. It was just never a factor. Now you have a second source of persistent advantage to lean on a little bit harder, plus your Casualties of War setup. So I like this version of Golgari Adventures as well. I am completely on board with this being a strong pick for this tournament.
Yep, me too. Next up, Andrea Garian, Golgari Sacrifice, 3 Casualties of War main deck. A lot of 25 land green-black decks. You love to see it. Midnight Reaper, Master Girl, a couple Paradise Druid, again, main deck Thrashing Brontodon. 4 Duress in the sideboard, 0 Drill Bits, hate it.
I think I am willing to now write this off as a worse version of the Jund decks. Just a hard pass on it. I think you can do better. I think you get more, and you aren't super incentivized to have these ultra clean mana bases. And you see the only real pickup you get here is like Temple of Malady, which is a card I just don't like all that much, and Castle Locthwain, which is good, but you can play a copy in your Jund deck if you really want to. But Jund being able to cast the same spells, still having the Casualties of War top end, I just think you're prepared for more stuff if you were set up in that fashion.
Yeah, I know that you don't really like Midnight Reaper all that much, right? So you'd much prefer to have Mayhem Devil and maybe a lot of the same stuff going on as this deck?
Yeah, it just seems stronger to me. I mean, there's games where Midnight Reaper seems absolutely unstoppable. I've certainly played them on both sides where it just spirals out of control, but you have a lot of engines that just spiral out of control, and I'd rather interact with my opponent a little bit more, prevent them from doing what they're attempting to do.
All right, next up, Andrea Mengucci, Simic Ramp. This is one of the more interesting decks we've seen so far. 28 land, 2 Arboreal Grazer. I guess without Once Upon a Time, you can't lean on that card as much. Leafkin Druid, Risen Reef, Hydroid Krasis, Cavalier of Thorns, those are all 4 ofs. Nissa, Gross Spiral, a couple copies of Finale of Devastation, a couple copies of Quasi Duplicate, 1 Agent of Treachery, 1 End-Raise Forerunners.
I love this deck. I hope this is good. Like, this is my first exposure to specifically this build. Obviously, I've seen Cavalier of Thorns, Quasi Duplicate setups for a long time. This whole package of Finale of Devastation and still being a deck that can play Nissa in a world where Noxious Grasp is like basically done for. Not seeing a whole lot of Noxious Grasps in this tournament. Like the last Golgari list we looked at, only 1 copy. Very far cry from the 4 Noxious Grasp format. This is probably the best Nissa deck, and Nissa's still one of the best cards in all of Standard. I am very excited to put this together on Arena, play some games with it, and see exactly what it's capable of. I buy that this might just go over top of everything else going on in the format. And this, if there's a deck that broke it, this looks like the closest thing to me. Like this, the thing that can just come out of left field and completely dominate the tournament. It could be this green-blue deck.
The thing that I like the most about this deck, and like I messed around with Agent of Treachery, Cavalier, Quasi-Duplicate stuff before when Field of the Dead was huge.
Mm-hmm.
And I really, really like being able to finale for 1 on turn 3 to get Grazer to excel you to 5 mana.
Nice. Yeah, that's a nice little interaction. This deck just seems sweet. It's going to put some huge, huge bodies on the battlefield. And the endgame of End-Raze Forerunners is a neat little pickup where you just get to trample over everything. And we talked a bunch about how you have to have an endgame that can go through Cat Oven setups. I think End-Raze Forerunners will get the job done here. And you get 3 virtual copies with your Finale of Devastation, plus quasi-duplicate setups that you can do. This deck looks awesome. I am very excited to see this in action.
Yeah, I mean, also, like, Finale for 10 just kills them almost always, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So End-Raze Forerunners costs 8, so then you have it Finale at 10 mana, but also you have it at 12 mana, and yeah, just a lot of ways to actually end the game, which is great.
And you'll hit those mana thresholds very reliably in a world where Nissa isn't dying all the time, which it will not. And Cavalier of Thorns, we know how high I've been on this card. The body here shuts down virtually everything in the format. Only the largest of core vaults can get over Cavalier of Thorns. So love, love, love this deck. Super nice job from Menguchi. And who's the other person playing it? I don't remember offhand. We'll get to it.
I still have my stack of Cavalier of Thorns too, so like, let's go. Make me rich.
I sold mine very early on, but I still have a few floating around.
Well, I can give you some of mine so that you're somewhat invested.
Nice.
I like that idea.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a good time rooting for this deck for sure.
Yeah, Risen Reef is one of those cards that it fell out of favor, right? Because, people doing the more proactive Oko Wicked Wolf stuff just kind of embarrassed it.
Mm-hmm.
And Mayhem Devil is also a card that is very good against Risen Reef. And now this deck against the Golgari decks, like, you could probably just run away with the game with that card.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Not a whole lot of ways to get punished for playing that unless you're up against Jund. And I'm assuming there'll be some shift against Jund. Like, I don't know, maybe you can afford to keep in a couple copies just for like big snowball turns. But there's stuff like, I guess we'll go like Return to Nature in post-board games a lot of the time against them, which seems fine. Yeah, maybe some Ether Gust. I don't know. It doesn't seem like the sideboard is completely stacked against those decks, but I think you just might be naturally good against it, so you don't need a whole bunch of sideboard slots.
Yeah, every single card in your main deck seems great against them.
Right.
Anyway, moving on. Andrew Cuneo, Izzet Flash for Bone Crusher Giant, Gadwick the Wizened, Brineborn Cutthroat, Brazen Borrower, 26 land, handful of counterspells, ops, some Rails, Outbursts, and Scorching Dragonfires. Not a ton of removal, so it looks like these players all knew that aggro decks were just not going to show up.
Yeah, so that, to me, seems like the MPL read. Like, just really spotting that you don't have to account for aggro decks. And maybe that is a differentiating point between MPL and Challenger. Not to say a bunch of Challengers didn't reach that conclusion as well, but that is the biggest takeaway from the MPL decks we've seen thus far. Basically just giving up on those aggressive matchups, and correctly so. Yeah,
I mean, in a lot of the Golgari decks, we're still seeing a lot of copies of things like Massacre Girl, which I think, outside of random mirror scenarios, are just like, don't look very good in this tournament. But like, when you're playing on ladder or something, if that's how people were preparing, it would make sense that, you're running into a much wider variety of decks. Like, there are going to be some aggro decks at the top of ladder, and you need to be a little bit more well-rounded. You can't make those hard reads like you can in a tournament that's a little smaller like this one is. So yeah, that could be kind of the turning point where it's like the MPL people are just like, all right, I'm going to cut removal for counterspells or whatever. And then maybe a lot of the challengers or just people playing Golgari or Jund in general have these things like Massacre Girl that are not going to be very good.
If you are ever lucky enough to participate in one of these tournaments, the biggest piece of advice I would give you is that small field tournament play does not equal ladder play. It is very different, and you have to think about how to account for that.
I agree with that. Next up, Andrew Smith. Hold on. What do you think about this as a deck in general? Because I played with this before. I didn't really like it very much, but
also have not really liked it. Having 4 Gadwick is an approach I've never taken before, and I think that's interesting in terms of being able to just play a huge late game, 26 lands. So this deck continues to get bigger and bigger and is less tempo based, more just like my spells are very good against you. If what people are doing is trying to play 6 mana sorceries, 4 mana enchantments, this deck loaded with Negate, Quench, and Ionize seems extremely, extremely good against those kind of setups. You get the appeal of these flash decks into that type of format. So if you get the right matchups, things look good. And there's a ton of the right matchups in this format. I still think to some extent you are extremely die roll dependent. You don't just fold with this setup in games where you're on the draw like you did in some earlier versions of Simic Flash with a bunch of really, really weak cards in them. But games are certainly harder once you fall back onto the draw. I don't know. I mean, like, I think with the right pairings, this list could go very, very deep. And there's a lot of right pairings around. It would just be a scary, scary call for me because I don't think the power level of the deck is there. And there might be better ways of doing this same stuff. We'll see as we move through the tournament.
Yep. All right. Andrew Smith, Jund Sacrifice. Again, 3 Massacre Girl. 1 Casualties main deck. 2 Casualties in the sideboard. The red is pretty light just for Mayhem Devil. And Cindervines in the board. And that's it.
Not a huge fan of this list. It feels a little outdated to me in a lot of ways. I just don't think it has accounted for the way the format has changed. And like something like Cindervines over Thrashing Brontodon in the main deck, it just seems like there's a whole bunch of stuff this deck is not going to have answers for. And we mentioned how Massacre Girl doesn't seem to be great into this field. There's 3 copies of it in the main deck. And I think this particular build is going to be super reliant to just having an engine, sticking it, letting it run away with the game. But people are all accounting for your engine. Everyone knew this was coming. I don't know how often this particular build is going to be able to achieve those goals.
Word. Next up, Antonino DeRosa, Izzet Flash. Antonino qualified with Rakdos Sac, and him and Neil Reeves were working on the deck together. And I would be surprised if Neil did not have a hand in this deck also, especially since it is very similar to Cunio's, except has 2 additional counter spells, which seems like a very Neil thing to do.
Yeah, hard counter magic here. Also a couple of big threats on the top end as opposed to just Max and Godwick. We're looking at a God Eternal Kefnet and a Niv Mizzet Perun. Haven't seen that card. Is it Perun or Perrin?
I believe it's Perrin, but
okay. I'm going to call it Perun then.
All right.
Just to tilt everyone who's listening.
Cool.
I haven't seen that card in a long time, but seems very powerful.
Yeah, another Niv Mizzet in the sideboard. And that's one of the cards where it's not super good against a lot of the green-black setups, but if you are expecting mirror matches, well, you're kind of there. You know, you have Niv Mizzet, you have 2 additional counter spells. Like, what more could you possibly want?
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, it seems like Antonino is very well set up for other folks who are trying to do the same type of thing as he is.
Moving on to Autumn Burchett, I believe they're playing the same list as Allie. And
yes, this looks identical, at least in the main deck to me.
Yeah, that appears to check out. Yeah, just picture all the same stuff that we said about Allie's deck.
We just said it again. Next.
Yeah, this deck is great. Next up, Beatriz Garancha, Jeskai Fires. A little bit more consistent in this list. A lot more 4-ofs. 7 Cavaliers, 2 Kenrith, a couple Shimmer of possibilities, only 3 Deafening Clarions. That's another one of the cards where it's like, if there's not a lot of aggro, what is this card actually doing for you? You know, like maybe you're wiping some of the cat setups or whatever, setting them back a little bit. And then 3 copies of Justice Strike, which I like in favor of things like Deafening Clarion, just because it's a little bit better in things like the mirror match.
I agree. I think Justice Strike has been criminally underplayed in these decks. Good to see the full 4 amongst main deck and sideboard here. A couple Disenchants lurking in the sideboard, a Tithe Taker. This is closer to a Fires list that I could get on board with. Seems cleaner, more focused. 4 Sphinx of Foresight. I think it's correct. You and I have talked ad nauseum about how you just need Fires or your deck is very, very bad. This deck will have Fires more often. So as far as your Jeskai Fires builds go, I like this one quite a bit more. Also, shout outs to the 1 Quench in the main deck. Love it. So smart. Open deck list. Make your opponents account for it. And you just get such value out of an inclusion like that. I love seeing those type of concessions to open deck list and small field tournaments.
Yeah, I do love that. I would imagine, yeah, what is the difference with this tournament versus like the Pro Tours where like they're displaying all of the sideboard cards instead of just like one of each of the sideboard cards? Have we talked about this already?
We may have touched on it in prior episodes when they made the change basically to revealing sideboard cards. I mean, you tell me. You have participated in that mode of tournament. I have not. So I'm curious to hear your take on how it affects your preparation and just the 75 you're going to ultimately present.
Well, I'm just looking at Garancha's sideboard and how there's like one Tithe Taker is just like, all right, that's kind of random. But like, if this sideboard were condensed a little bit more, I might think that they had access to like 4, if they only showed me that, just one of every card name that they're playing. But yeah, that's what made me think of it. And then I was like, wait, why are there full sideboards? I don't know.
Yeah, this is full reveal. You get the full 75 here. I am not sure what the Tithe Taker is for. I mean, you can play it somewhat successfully against Cat Oven stuff and make them a little bit more sorcery speed, which is fine-ish, not hugely impactful. So not sure on that card.
No, I'm not
that Quench.
I'm not mad at the Tithe Taker. I think the main deck Quench is great. I was just thinking like, why would they play one? Oh, maybe the deck lists are like this, and it's like, but they're all online. Like anyone could look at them. So right. Everyone is going to know that you only have one, but like that would be kind of a cute thing to do, right? Or like you play this,
sure. Yeah,
you play this thing that makes it look like you have 4 in the sideboard, and in reality you only have the 1 copy or whatever. Mysteries.
That's particularly cool with cards that very much change your entire game plan, like something like Hero of Precinct 1, going back a few formats ago, just having one Hero of Precinct 1 in your Esper Control sideboard in that scenario really, really changes what your opponents may be accounting for. Like, I don't know if you want to give up a whole sideboard slot for that. You have to believe that one Hero of Precinct 1 would also matter somewhere else, but it really puts your opponents in the squeeze.
Yeah, or something like Legion Warboss, right? Where
sure, another great example.
If they don't sideboard like you have it, you could potentially just run them over with it. So,
right.
Anyway, let's move on to what I assume is your favorite deck in the tournament. This is Ben Stark playing Azorius Control. I believe Ifro playing also the same list. 27 land, 5 total castles, 3 blue, 2 white, Planar Cleansing, Time Wipe, Borrower, Gadwick, Absorb, Dovin's Veto. You got to love this, right?
I want to. I want to absolutely love this deck. My experiences with blue-white control were so bad that I was just off it basically immediately. I am not saying this deck is bad. It's very possible that they have identified the problems that I felt and actually took the time to fix them, as opposed to me who just gave up. I will say that 3 Planar Cleansing seems extremely, extremely smart to me. It's one of the things that really pulled me back to exploring these archetypes again. I focus mostly on Esper, but having 3 Planar Cleansing seems very, very good against this field. Thinking about other cards which seem strong, I love how hard we're getting into Gadwick the Wizened. This card keeps showing up more and more, and it is very, very powerful, especially in these decks. And you have to mention the 3 Aether Gust main. As I said, it feels like this really hit the sweet spot, and I think they're going to be rewarded for their risk, because 10% of the field, this card being dead, means that you're getting huge, huge value in so many spots. You've made yourself so much better against fires and a lot of the haymakers from the Cat Fires decks, or from the Cat Oven decks. So huge, huge plus for including Aether Gust in the main deck.
Yeah, I think this list is really good. Ifro posted on Twitter that he thinks his deck is good. It just takes a very long time to win. And I would agree with that. I tried this before the last PT, and it was kind of miserable, but it makes more sense to play this in an arena tournament than a real life tournament, because I think real life you just get a million draws.
Sure. Yeah, you have to win with Castle Ardenvale a lot. It definitely comes up and takes a long, long amount of time. Yep. I think this deck remains underrepresented on the ladder because of that, just because you have to grind out a bunch of your games. There are some that you just steal with Brazen Borrower. They're rare, though. It's usually a lot of grinding.
Yep, agreed. Also worth noting, 4th Planar Cleansing in the sideboard, just not messing around. Love it.
Yeah, I think that card's tremendous. I'll also point to the 1 Finale of Revelation as a way to hard closeout games in a bunch of spots as well.
Yeah. I mean, that gives you a decent amount of inevitability, especially if your counterspells are alive against your opponent.
Mm-hmm.
All right, next up, Brad Nelson, Simic Flash. And it should be noted that this is like Flash, but kind of not. There are Nightpack Ambushers and Frilled Mystics, but also 3 Paradise Druid, 2 Brazen Borrower, 2 Hydroid Krasis, 4 Nissa, 26 land, Growth Spiral, 9 counterspells, and 2 Aether Gusts. That's it.
Yeah, we cut all the bad cards. And whereas before you could never, ever win a game from behind under any circumstances, now there's some actual powerful cards here. And maybe that's enough to make this a real deck, whereas previously a deck I hated. But I was drawn to the setups of Frilled Mystic and Nightpack Ambusher. That seems very, very good right now. Being able to still do that stuff and get access to powerful spells like Nissa, Hydroid Krasis to go over top of folks. Interesting stuff. A lot of counter magic here. 4 mana enchantments, 6 mana sorceries, not going to look so good into Brad's open mana. So I'm keeping my eye on it. I've been very low on Simic Flash throughout its existence. This particular build, though, is doing a lot of things I like.
Yeah, no, I like this build a lot. It is very innovative and looks potentially very, very good. And again, there's stuff in Brad's sideboard like 2 Chemisters Insights, right? It's like these players are expecting to play against more blue decks, more control decks.
Smart read. It's proven to be true. There's a lot of blue-red, a lot of green-blue, and also Esper floating around a little bit, blue-white. I think they'll get value from that card for sure.
Next up, BBD, Jund Sacrifice, all 4 ofs, baby. How do you feel about this?
So this is something that when actually the first time I tested basically this exact list, it's crazy how close this is to what I was playing, was when someone was asking me what I would do to adapt my deck for best of 1 play on Arena. And I hadn't really given it a lot of thought, but I was like, well, I mean, just make yourself as linear as possible. Make sure you always have an engine and jam Midnight Reaper, jam Corvold, and just have tons and tons of card advantage. And I messed around with it a little bit, and it was good. I mean, it had potential. And I don't know how this is going to line up against what everyone else has done at this point, but I definitely think this tact is something that people should have explored, should have spent some time on. BBD is always going to have access to card advantage. You cannot grind him out. He will be able to play through things like Casualties of War very, very effectively, I believe. So in terms of being a step ahead of the metagame, BBD is taking the biggest shot I've seen out of anyone with these Jund Sacrifice lists. This looks totally different from what everyone else is doing, and I buy that it just might work. I'll be keeping a close eye on this deck list as well.
Yeah, also of note, 4 Epic Downfalls in the sideboard, only 2 copies of Casualty of War, and 3 Questing Beast. Yeah.
Yep, love that too. We talked a little bit last week about how I could see an approach for this deck just really getting aggressive and trying to get under things and not dealing with the whole Casualties of War murk that you could otherwise get caught up in. So special deck building here. I am not 100% sold. I'm not going to say like this is my pick to win the tournament, but this has, again, potential to be like one of the more broken decks in the field.
I hope BBD does win, and then Corvold becomes his new Obsidian.
It has a lot of the same characteristics. Big, expensive, dumb, legendary creature. I am concerned about what happens to the availability and price of Corvold in a world where we all are just playing 4 in our decks. But honestly, nobody plays Paper Standard anymore anyway, so who cares?
Fair enough. Next up, Carlos Romao, Jund Sacrifice. 25 lands, so 1 more than BBD, a couple Paradise Druids, couple Thrashing Brontodons, couple Wicked Wolves, couple Corvolds, Midnight Reaper, 3 Casualties. This seems fairly stock compared to what everyone else is doing.
Yep, fine and safe and a good deck. Nothing really groundbreaking here to talk about, though. I'm fine moving on if you are.
Yeah, Masker Girls in the sideboard. Love it.
Yep.
Oh, next up, it's our boy, Kavartek.
Yeah, I like this deck.
Golgari Adventure. Okay, so 4 Vivian, 3 Great Henge, 24 land. We talked about the beatdown plan. Chris Kavartek, 3 Questing Beast, 4 Rotting Regisaur. I love this, dude.
Just getting the beats on with Vivian Arcbow Ranger. Chris also pushed on Vivian Arcbow Ranger last MC.
Right.
Playing blue-green with Vivian Arcbow Ranger. And you and I have now played that card in a bunch of places, in a bunch of formats. It's powerful. It's messed up. It deserves probably more respect than it gets. And it gets played a lot. But it stretches back to even older formats. You and I have now played it in Modern a bunch and been very pleased with it.
No, that was a mistake. Take that back.
No. That card was good.
Bad.
I still think you're crazy about that. I think having Craterhoof Behemoth setups is so important. But whatever, that's besides the point. We both love Vivian Arcbow Ranger, especially in this setup. And one of the first things, if you go back to like when we first previewed Throne of Eldraine, the thing we really wanted to do was Great Henge plus Rotting Regisaur. And it only took a ton of bans to finally get us to the point where it's conceivable to do that. But this deck has a lot of nice synergies, a lot of nice pieces that go together very well. And it has a plan. It will get your opponent dead very quickly, but against stuff that is looking to take a more controlling approach, something like blue-white that we saw from Ben Stark, you can grind here. I mean, Great Henge is a very, very powerful engine. You have Planeswalkers as a means of persistent threats. The fact that they're doing planar cleansing stuff and can account for everything that you're doing, it matters a bunch. And it's smart on the blue-white player's part. But you can find ways to grind out little bits of value and really pressure them. So this list seems very, very cool to me. Again, I like the green-black Adventures decks that are pushing very hard in one direction. And this seems to kind of split the difference and have both poles working simultaneously in a way that doesn't disgust me like the baseline Golgari Adventures deck does.
Yeah, no, I agree with that completely. And I like Chris's take yet again. I think that going to Rotting Regisaur to go along with Vivian Arkbow and then adding Great Henge at the top of things, I mean, it gives you this really nice straightforward beatdown plan, and it gives you yet another way to grind on top of Edgewall Innkeeper. So super smart.
One of the things I'm learning about Chris's deck building, and I mean, this sounds like a slight, but it's anything but. It is a compliment of the highest order. And that is that his deck building is simple in a lot of ways. It's just efficient. It's smart. It pairs the correct cards together. And you see his list afterwards and you go, oh yeah, well, that's kind of obvious. But nobody does it ahead of time. Like, he's the only one doing it.
Yep.
And I think that's what makes his approach very, very special.
Yeah, love it. Do you know who was the person with the worst odds to win the tournament on Pinnacle?
No, I do not.
It was Chris Pikula, and he's playing Jeskai Fires.
Chris, with a lot of friends working over at Pinnacle, having his back very, very hard. That's an interesting little slight to throw his way.
Cho was telling me about like a Twitter conversation he saw or something where it was like, oh yeah, well, like we knew who a lot of people were working with. And then Cho was just like, what does that mean? Like, who is Chris working with that like made them think that he was such an underdog? And then Chris chimed in and was just like, yeah, I'm working by myself. And it's like, damn, cold-blooded.
What beats? Well, I will say for Chris's part, he has come to a list of fires of invention that I'm totally fine with, like fine conclusions. I guess I'm a little concerned with how many sweepers there are in the deck if I'm going to nitpick. I'd rather have fewer than more. Chris has 4 Deafening Clarions, 1 Time Wipe. But as far as the core stuff, like 4 Sphinx of Foresight, almost certainly correct. Cavalier numbers all look good. Kenrith looks good. So this setup seems fine, if unexciting. We'll have to see how Chris's plans are and if he can find some magic, some of that old magic to find another PT top 8.
Yeah. Next up, Christian Hauk, also playing Jeskai Fires. Pretty similar list to Chris's, actually.
Yeah, not seeing much difference whatsoever, actually. They're extremely, extremely close in their decks. I think Christian Hauk is like +1 Prison Realm minus Drawn from Dreams is the quick read I'm making. There might be a couple other differences, but very...
It's like also minus a Shimmer.
Right. Very similar list for sure. Not too much else to say about this. I think we've set our part on stock Jeskai Fires.
Yeah. Another fun one, Daniel Vega, Sultai Ramp, Paradise Druid, Hydroid Krasis, some Incubation Druids. Haven't seen that card in a while. 3 Brazen Borrower, 2 Gadwick. Powering out these cards, 4 Circuitous Route, 4 Growth Spiral, 4 Nissa, also 4 Casualties of War. This is a wild deck.
This deck is big. I mean, it has a lot of X spells in Hydroid Krasis. Gadwick, the Wizened, is using that mana it's getting from Circuitous Route very effectively. Again, a world with no aggro. This is what decks look like. They get very big. They don't worry about the battlefield, and they have huge, huge haymakers on the top end because you know you're going to get the time to do all your setup stuff. So this, again, seems like a very good read into the field. I know nothing about how this deck plays. I have no experience with it. I'm not going to pretend to. Just looking at it and what it's capable of, it seems fine for the format that showed up.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm not completely sold that this is a better version of what Manguchi's doing, because I do feel like you can ramp and then play casualties and still end up losing, whereas Manguchi is just committed to going over the top and like not really interacting at any point. You know, he's just like, yeah, whatever, I'll let you do your thing, and then eventually I'll kill you. And this deck is just like, well, I'm going to try and interact, and I'm going to try and draw some cards and, you know, win by casualties-ing you a bunch. But realistically, I think Finale Devastation is probably just a better plan than all that stuff. Yeah,
the question is, how much did folks account for Casualties of War? And it's certainly possible that they did their homework. It was not possible to do your homework on the Finale of Devastation setups because that basically didn't exist. But I think a lot of players will have accounted for Casualties of War in their deck building. It's still just a default powerful card. There's only so much you can do about having 5 of your permanents blown up. But we will see if it still is an effective endgame for these Sultai Ramp decks.
Yep. And next up, Dmitry Budakov, Rakdos Sac. This one is a little on the slower side. No Knight of the Ebon Legion. Instead has 4 Claim the Firstborn and 4 Angrath's Rampage.
This reminds me of the deck that knocked me out of Twitch Rivals in the hands of Preddy. Yeah, it looks very, very similar. I will say that when this deck gets its Priest of Forgotten Gods engine going, it feels incredible. Maybe that setup is super strong against things like Simic Ramp, against things that are trying to go a little bit bigger. But it's also soft against all the control decks. So I think if you get paired against a bunch of green mid-range, I like this setup. I am not huge against control, a bunch of dead cards here. So this deck seems like it's going to need some good pairings to go deep.
God, I love this deck so much. I do think it is a lot better without as many Wicked Wolves in the format. It just means that Priest of Forgotten Gods is able to run rampant a little more often than it used to, because it used to be 0 effectively. But Budakov does have 4 Midnight Reapers. Yeah, he's got a bunch of dead cards, especially against things like Blue-White Control, but Claim the Firstborn, Angrath's Rampage against stuff like Brineborn Cutthroat or whatever. It's like, even in the creature light matchups, I think those cards are going to be okay. It is just like actual Blue-White Control that I'd be very worried about.
Yeah, and there's not too much of that in the tournament. Only 3 players, I believe, playing. So we'll have to see how things go for Budakov.
Next up, we have Jeskai Fires by Ellie Rice. This deck is wild. Holy crap. I need a minute to unpack this.
Yeah,
so 4 Fires of Invention.
Lot to unpack.
4 Fires of Invention. Some Biogenic Oozes. Ugin. Casualties of War. Bond of Flourishing. I love that. Main deck, Cry the Carnarium. So, yeah, basically just doing like Jeskai Fires sort of big stuff. Bond of Flourishing as your cantrip. And then that allows you to play Casualties of War on the top end.
So, no 1-drops, no 2-drop accelerant. You basically start the game on turn 3. And so it seems like that should be something I'm knocking. But it's really not in this format. I think it's probably okay to start the game on turn 3, which is wild to say. And then the hits just keep coming. And I don't know if this is good enough. I have no idea. I won't pretend to. But it accounts for what everyone else is doing. I will say that. And it seems to have made some smart adaptations to the metagame. I am concerned about Cry of the Carnarium. I actually don't think that card is all that strong right now. Although maybe if you catch a bunch of Midnight Reapers, you will prove me wrong.
Or Unprotected Cats.
Unprotected Cats. Those are rare for the most part. I mean, especially with open deck lists.
Yep.
But if it happens, it'll feel real good, though. So we'll have to see how that card plays out. And yeah, interesting stuff here. Very, very powerful cards. I am interested as to whether the top end here can actually keep up, just because decks do go so huge. So the Casualties of War, Ugin as your top end seems a little bit smaller than some of the other decks, but you can also just get your opponent dead with Cavalier of Flame and Questing Beast, and that matters a lot as well.
Yeah, I think what Ellie did was, you're right, where this deck doesn't really do a whole lot on turn 2. You have Bond of Flourishing and Bone Crusher Giant. You don't really want to be casting Assassin's Trophy on turn 2. And Cry is the card that she is trying to use to catch back up. And it just so happens that there's not a ton of aggro. I do think that Cry is decent in some of the matchups, like anything with Midnight Reaper. It can be pretty effective. And some of the opening draws from the Adventures deck, certainly. But yeah, very, very interesting. I want to see how this deck does. And the next deck we have Ephro. Same 75 as Ben, it looks like.
Yep, we've said our piece.
Moving on, Esther Trujillo. Is that right?
I think so. Trujillo seems good with my very limited knowledge of Spanish.
I believe she won one of the team GPs earlier this year.
That sounds correct to me, yes.
Yeah, Gruul Adventures. We've seen this before. Edgewalling Keeper, Pelt Collector. Give them the beatdowns. Ember Cleaves at the top. How do you feel about this right now? I feel like this could be decent, and in the vein of Golgari Adventure needing to pick pick a lane, basically. This does a very good job of that.
This is as aggressive as we get in this format, right? Like this is this is the approach you can take to get your opponent dead. This could do a really good job punishing the people who I still think correctly chose not to account for aggro for the most part. Maybe this just has enough power to close out games and enough stretch into the late game with Edgewall and Keeper where you're not just completely dead to the first sweeper. I am not 100% sold that Pelt Collector is a real thing you can do in this format. I have had my issues with these green-red decks throughout. I found one last week that I was pretty high on for a minute where I was playing some Karns, and I did a deck tech over on our YouTube page about that list. And it had some promise. It certainly felt good in a lot of instances, but your card quality is a lot lower than all of these decks that are capable of just going huge. I think about something like a Cavalier of Thorns and how scary that card is against this deck.
Yeah.
You better have your Ember Cleaves ready. So I don't know. There's a spot to exploit for this deck. You can certainly punish people who, as I said, correctly didn't account for aggro. But you do have to worry about the fact that there's things like main deck Ether Grasp that can really mess up your Embercleave setups. And there's some problems with this list. Will require some favorable matchups, I think, to go deep.
And the mana's awkward to top it all off.
That's the biggest thing about these Gruul decks, and it has remained from the beginning. Your mana base is just horrible. 17 basics is a lot to live through.
And next up, we have Federico Bastos, old school Magic player, Jund Sacrifice, 25 land and 2 District Guide. I love it. Respect.
Yeah, District Guide is what lets you know that he's an old school Magic player, because that is an old school card right there. The new Civic Wayfinder. I don't know that you actually needed the card in this deck. It's here now, though. I will say that Paradise Druid routinely underperformed for me recently, and a lot of folks are looking to make a move to get away from it. The way of using District Guide to do so, not bad. You certainly want to curve out. You want to be able to make sure you're casting your Korvalds in a timely fashion, and then Casualties of War on the top end really incentivizes hitting those land drops. So you had to account for it in some way. I like the way Canister did it a little bit better. We'll get to that when we get there.
Dude, spoilers.
Yeah, sorry about that. But still, just basically your solid Jund list. Nothing all that exciting besides the District Guide setup.
Yeah, with 3 Wicked Wolves, I would kind of want Paradise Druid instead, especially since Bastos has Brontodons and Midnight Reapers and Mayhem Devils already in the 3-drop slot. It seems like pretty crowded.
Yeah, for sure. But Paradise Druid being picked off by opposing Mayhem Devils was super problematic, and I was boarding them out in so many matchups. And again, that doesn't disqualify it as a card. Like, just because you sideboard it out doesn't mean it's necessarily flawed. But the fact that you're able to still function without it points to, okay, maybe I can look for some other solutions.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not great. Moving on, we have Gabe Nassif, Izzet Flash, pretty close to the same deck as Cuneo, if not the exact same deck. No Nehebs in the sideboard.
Yeah, Cuneo tweeted something about misclicking. I think he's just trolling or like trying to make a story. I don't think he actually registered Neheb. But
is he trying to register Negate instead?
Who knows? That is the differentiating point between these lists, though.
I mean, that's pretty awkward if it actually happened. But yeah, I do think that knowing him, likely a troll.
Yeah, no way of knowing.
The Cuneo cried wolf, man. It's just an ongoing saga. Next up, Greg Kowalski, Jund Sacrifice. This list is kind of all over the place. 3 Cauldron Familiar, 1 Korvold, 2 Murderous Rider, 3 Paradise Druid, 3 Wicked Wolf, 2 Massacre Grill, 2 Midnight Reaper, 1 Garruk, 2 Casualties. A little bit of everything, you know?
Hedging a little bit all over the place. Less high on Garruk these days as I previously was, but it is a plan that you have where your opponents don't. The heavier lean on Massacre Girl, we already talked about that, and Wicked Wolf. I don't know if you're going to find all the targets you were looking for those cards, and this feels old. That's the only way to describe it. I mean, that doesn't mean it's bad. I'm not disqualifying this deck. I think there's a very good chance that it goes deep, but it just feels like Jund Sacrifice did a couple weeks ago, basically.
How do you feel about 3 Cauldron Familiar?
It's interesting. I mean, you don't want to draw like multiples in your opener, but you always want to have one. Yeah. So I get the tension. I get wanting to trim it, and I sideboarded it out a copy quite often when I just needed slots. It's like, okay, I can actually bear the cost of just having 1 fewer Cauldron Familiar. I don't know. I'm inclined to play 4 just because the games where you have it are so different from the games you don't, even if you don't want to draw multiples. So we'll have to see how that plays out.
Yeah, it's legit. I mean, it also matters how many different sources of card advantage you have. Like any Cauldron Familiar you draw when you have a Midnight Reaper is just not that big of a deal. You know, you can usually find a way to trade it into a card somehow, but it is very interesting. And I can certainly imagine a lot of like, you know, land heavy hands where you have a Cauldron Familiar and you're just like, God, I wish this was any other card. And it's not necessary for the deck to function at 100% efficacy. And if you're getting casualties, you're probably not going to have access to a lot of your engine pieces. So yeah, I can see cutting one.
Yeah.
Moving on, Isaac Kroot, Golgari Adventure for Questing Beast, 4 casualties. Pick a lane.
This is the version I hate, unfortunately. Sorry, Isaac. This is the one that I think is not doing a good job really committing to any plan. And like I said, I think Chris found a way to do both that was acceptable to me. This, though, is not the tact I would take. It doesn't seem like you do any of the games well. You get outscaled really hard in the late game by all these decks that are going huge. Your aggression isn't there anymore. So this is the one version, I think, of Golgari Adventures in the tournament that I really do not like.
I feel like you can do stuff like play a threat and then play casualties and another casualties and just kind of, you know, nickel and dime them out. But yeah, I would rather have one plan or the other.
Right there with you.
It is weird to like get them down to 10, have them stabilize, and then you're like, well, I have this casualties, and now we're just playing a long game where I'm drawing these beatdown cards. So next one, Jan Mikkonen, also known as Savage, playing Rakdos Sac. This one with some gutter bones. The other one have gutter bones too? Yeah. This is more like Antonino's list from the thing.
Yeah, leans a little more aggressive. Like I said, this is about as close to aggressive as you can get in this format, but doesn't really do that plan all that well, and certainly doesn't scale into the late game whatsoever. A lot of this looks pretty quaint against what the other decks are capable of in the late game. I think the best games for this deck will be games where it can get aggressive, and probably those mean post-board games where it has access to Dreadhorde Butcher, but not thrilled about this particular setup.
Yeah, Cavalier and Knight, not something I'm super excited about.
Seems low impact in the format.
Yeah. Next up, Javier Dominguez demonstrating his range with Simic Flash. Same deck as Brad and Seth.
Let's see what y'all got. Let's see if you figured it out. Like I said, interesting approach.
It's wild to me. Aren't like Javier and Mengucci just like attached at the hip? Like I know that they don't play the same deck all the time, but like it is weird for them to both play Simic and play like such wildly diverging versions.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear what their reasoning was for not supporting each other's decks. They certainly always test together. They often arrive at the same conclusions. So interesting to see them split here.
Okay, I don't care about that anymore. I moved on to the next deck list by Jean-Emmanuel Depras, Temur Adventure, Escaped the Wilds, Lucky Clover, main deck Return to Nature. What is this?
I've seen this deck floating around a little bit.
No, me too.
Ladder.
It is wild, though.
It is wild. I don't know if it's good. I have not been impressed by it whatsoever in playing against it. More pick a lane problems, maybe, except there's also just no aggressive lane to have. Like, I don't know. I'm just not convinced this appropriately scales into the late game. You don't want to be the smaller mid-range deck. We've talked about that a lot. And maybe I'm undervaluing like Lucky Clover plus Beanstalk Giant as a way of fueling just tremendous crises. But I think the blue-green deck of Mengucci is going to do a better job doing this game plan, basically, without as much nonsense. And this has more abilities to account for a wider format, like something like Fae of Wishes certainly gives you many, many more game plans. I just think Mengucci's approach to a big Krasis deck made a hard read on the format and got rewarded for it, whereas this deck tried to hedge a little bit.
Yeah, basically when you look at something like Bone Crusher Giant, it's just a little too small ball for what the format is trying to do. And obviously if you're expecting like some Rakdos Knights or Mono Red or whatever, like you kind of want that amount of interaction. And yeah, I just don't feel like for this tournament specifically, that's where you want to be. It is interesting to me that this is a Fae of Wishes Lucky Clover deck that doesn't have Fires of Invention. So you normally see like the big 6-mana cards to Fae of Wishes for, whereas the Pra sideboard is just like all these cheap cards, because you're just doing Fae of Wishes the hard way.
Yeah, fling in the sideboard. That's going to get someone with Beanstalk Giant for sure.
Yeah. And then, you have like these Infi setups with Plane-Wide Celebration and Once and Future. So this deck's weird.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe I'm underestimating how much that stuff scales together, or you can just do that forever. I don't know.
I feel like you do that stuff and then you just get raised board or whatever. So
Right. Yeah, smaller version of the mid-range deck is my concern.
Yes. Next deck, Izzet Flash by Jess Stefan. 3 Gadwick, 1 Spectral Sailor, 9 counterspells, like 2 shock, whereas the Pantheon folks have Scorching Dragonfire. Jess also has 26 land. Pretty similar sideboard, no Skargan Hellkites or whatever. But yeah, overall, like pretty similar.
Yeah, looks about the same to me. I am curious to hear the story of the 1 Spectral Sailor and how it made the cut.
It's good with Gadwick because it's a 1-mana flash card.
That is accurate. I will give you that.
That's all I got.
I don't know. Yeah, maybe it is that simple. But yeah, we've talked about this deck a bunch. I think it's fine. Nothing really distinguishing this particular build from the other ones we've talked about.
All right, next deck, John Rolfe. This one is labeled as Rakdos Fires. Does Rolfe have the coolest deck in the tournament?
No, but it's close. It's very, very close for me. This is another one that's been making the rounds recently.
It's a Ben White's deck, right?
Yeah, I think that's correct. I think that's right. Has seen some play on ladder and is just doing a really nice job finding lethal and closing the game quicker than the average Fires of Invention deck does. So I don't have any games under my belt with this, but you see the explosive potential. Mayhem Devil plus God Eternal Bantu. Man, that has to feel so good.
Yeah, Fireball. Midnight Reaper, Cauldron Familiar, Witch's Oven, 4 Bantu, 4 Cavalier of Flame, Mayhem Devil, Stormfist Crusader, and then 2 copies of Covetous Urge, which makes John play Steam Vents over Mountains, and then 2 more Covetous Urge in the sideboard. Why?
I think this card is good. Like,
why?
I've tried this in a bunch of my decks, and I think it's just fine, especially in a format where, like, things are huge and there's a lot of opportunities to just take incredibly impactful spells from your opponent, get card advantage, and then turn their own weapons against them. I am sure there will be casualties of war cast by this Covetous Urge for sure.
Sure. I guess if you're expecting like Fire's Mirrors, this is the best thing, right? Like you Thoughtseize theirs, and then you just get to cast one and kind of go off.
Yeah, that seems great to me.
You just get smashed by Teferi, but whatever.
No, they won't have it. Don't worry about it.
Okay, fair enough.
We talked a bunch about like the ability of Kriskavar deck to split lanes effectively. It's usually a criticism we levy at decks, but when it's done well, it can be really impressive. I think it's done well here. I think this deck has access to multiple game plans and also just like oops, you're dead setups, which is a nice place to be in this format.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of what you want to be doing with the Rakdos decks, right? Where it's like they have kind of like this early-ish beatdown plan, but they don't scale well enough, and they're just going to get buried by the bigger decks, whereas this deck scales quite well. You have a Fireball finish, and you also have like these really explosive mid-game turns with Fires. So, I mean, I feel like this deck could actually just be a real thing.
Let's see how it does.
I'm rooting for you, John Rolfe. Always rooting for you, especially now that you have this weird deck with Covetous Urge. I don't know what happened, but it is what it is, I suppose. John Girardeau, Temur Reclamation, some Borrowers, some Bone Crushers, some Niv Mizzets, Wilderness Rex, some main deck counterspells, also main deck Scorching Dragonfire and Flame Sweep.
I hate this deck. I am so sorry, John, but Wilderness Reclamation in this format makes no sense to me. I don't know how people keep ending up here. There's the argument that like, oh, if everyone is doing big stuff, then Wilderness Reclamation can outscale it. I don't buy that. I think the way the other big decks are accounting for this deck is totally fine. I think enchantments are something people are accounting for in all their deck building. Even if you're not accounting specifically for Wilderness Reclamation, you're probably going to catch it by accident. Things like Ether Gust are super strong against Wilderness Reclamation, and you're not even like playing that card in contemplation of Wilderness Reclamation. There's just no good approach for these decks right now, and I've been so underwhelmed by them in the post-ban format.
Yep. Mostly agree with all that. I think the games where you do have Wilderness Reclamation, you're ahead of most things, but like finding it, resolving it, keeping it on the battlefield, those things are all very, very difficult, especially in a field where a lot of people are main decking Aether Gust, and I'm actually surprised that John himself is not main decking Aether Gust.
It's hard for me to understand how you convince yourself that Wilderness Reclamation is better than Fires. And it's not even like I'm that high on Fires. It's just I don't see what it offers strategically that Fires does not. I mean, I guess like more interactive spells is what you're saying. Like Mystical Dispute and Negate are good enough that I'm willing to do this setup. But I just don't buy it. And your deck is very inconsistent and does not function without Wilderness Reclamation whatsoever.
Yeah, next up, Jordan Cairns, buddy of mine from Vancouver area, Golgari Adventure. Talked to him a little bit before this tournament. Kind of doing similar stuff to Kavartek, actually. 2 Great Henge, 3 Rotting Regisaur, but also has only 2 Questing Beast, also has a couple of Epic Downfalls, 1 Return to Nature, so mostly the stuff that we like.
Yeah, it looks like reached the same conclusions, maybe didn't commit quite as hard as Chris did, but I still think this deck is set up fine. I don't know if I want to praise the 1 Return to Nature here. Like, I love one-ofs in the main deck, but this is one that doesn't really change your opponent's play pattern whatsoever. I think it's a fine card. Like, I don't hate it as a card. It's just less exciting as a one-of that can really mess with your opponent. Although Rankle is doing a little bit of that, but it's almost like not enough to force people to ever account for it. Like, they won't even consider it because it's so hard to play around in a lot of ways. Like, it's just going to do its thing regardless. So
I don't think it's there as a gotcha. It's just like, yeah, just like, oh, I just want like a Disenchant in my deck, or like, you know, the Rankle too. I will say that Jordan was the only person I was able to convince on Drill Bit, and he only has 1 Drill Bit and 3 Duress.
That's a token Drill Bit for you, Gerry, just so you know he respects your input, but he's not willing to commit.
Yeah, dude, that Drill Bit is cousin me. I'm taking full credit for that. Next up, Cat Light, Golgari Sacrifice, another 3 Cauldron Familiar. I like this.
Yeah, seems to be a trend.
Yeah, 3 Massacre Girl, a couple Wicked Wolf, a couple Brontodons, 4 casualties at the top end. You know, Cat has a plan. She's sticking to it. Appreciate that. Ooh, Drill Bit in the sideboard. Love it.
There you go. Hard commitment to Drill Bit. Yeah, we talked about Green Black a bunch. Not really too much else to say on it.
Yep. Oh my God.
Yeah, here you go. This is the one you've been waiting for.
Oh my God. Ken Yukihiro, my man. Ken Yukihiro, Hall of Fame 2020. 5 Color Fires, Gilded Goose, Paradise Druid, 4 Niv Mizzet Reborn, 4 Teferi, 4 Casualties, 3 Escape to the Wild. Oh my God, Ken. You genius.
Going real hard in the Niv Mizzet endgame. I have no idea what to make of this deck. It popped up last week. The first place I saw it was from Zvi. We talked about it a little bit on the cast last week, actually.
Yeah.
I don't know. Have you played with this deck? Do you have any read on how good it actually is? Because it looks powerful as hell.
Dude, I still don't have access to my Arena account.
Awesome. Awesome.
Not that I would have played anyway. To be
for
fair.
The host of Arena Decklist to say, I still can't get on Arena.
Look, man, I look at all the deck lists. I pay attention. I was talking to people leading up to the tournament. I just have not played very many games myself, at least of Arena. I've been playing a decent amount of Pioneer, making good use of that card hoarder loan account.
That's a fine approach.
I have an article this week on Pioneer post bans for the best deck in Pioneer. So come on, man. I'm doing work.
I know you're out here working hard. I know you love Pioneer right now. It's just funny to me. I guess I should note, like, the list that Zvi posted was Cat Oven deck. This is not that. This is just focused on the Fires plan. Escape to the Wilds plus Fires is weird. A lot of my early Fires deck had this setup, and it was like tension filled is the best way to describe it.
Oh, yeah. It's like kind of good, but kind of not.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know what to make of that. I love Niv Mizzet Reborn actually being a thing in Standard. I can't wait to watch this deck in action. I hope it's good enough to compete. What do you think? Does the end game scale hard enough? I mean, here's a Casualties of War deck that actually gets you dead, which I think is important. The huge body of Niv Mizzet will pay dividends for Ken throughout the entire tournament.
Right. And Niv can draw 4 cards, basically. You have 6 blue-green, 4 green-black, 4 blue-white, 3 red-green. Mm-hmm. And then the sideboard has 4 D-Spark and 4 Deputy, also like some Tulsa Mirrors or whatever. But I think Niv is not going to draw you like 6 cards, but it's going to draw you 3 super powerful ones.
Yeah, the good ones. And that's a nice approach to take to Niv. I think you get yourself in trouble when you try and maximize it to its absolute fullest. Just find the cards you need. And Niv is going to hit Casualties of War over and over and over. And if that's good against your opponent, you will run away with the game.
Can you genius? I love it. Oh no. Oh no. Disaster. Kenji Egashira, New Matanami, Temur Reclamation, say it ain't so.
Big Kenji fan. Less of a fan of Kenji's deck, unfortunately. I'm pulling for you, Kenji. I hope you prove me wrong. Still hate this deck.
Listen, at least Kenji has 27 land and 4 Arboreal Grazer. I do like that approach.
Yeah, I mean, you're doing your Wilderness Reclamation stuff ahead of time, which is fine-ish. It's still going to do almost nothing most of the time. Like I said, I really want to be wrong about this one. I just don't see the appeal of this deck at all, though.
New mod for Rivals 2020. I'm pulling for him.
Me too.
Next up, Azorius Control from Kohei Yoshino. 2 Agent of Treachery, 2 Gadwick, 4 Planar Cleansing, 1 Mass Manipulation, 4 Dovin's Veto. Good lord. This is nice.
I believe Planar Cleansing is a good card in this format. And if that is true, I really like the way Yoshino is set up for this tournament.
Yeah. Yeah, I like it a lot.
Apostle of Purifying Light in the sideboard.
Yeah, it's just like Rakdos Sac and then maybe the Knights deck. I think that's a pretty reasonable consideration. So
sure,
like that a decent amount. Sideboard has a lot of good utility. Disenchant, Giant Killer, Deputy Detention, Aether Gust, Dispute, another Mass Manip. Like, this deck could be nice. And the next deck, another Drone Sacrifice deck from Lishi-chan. 3 Casualties of War, 2 Paradise Druid, 2 Midnight Reaper, 2 Corvold, 3 Wicked Wolf, 2 Brontodon, 25 land. A couple of Temple of Maladies hanging out.
Yeah, fine-ish. Nothing super interesting to report on here.
Duress instead of drill bit. Hate it.
That's the only thing Jerry's looking for anymore. He just wants those drill bits.
No, I'd honestly scrolled down and I was like, wait a second. Scrolled back up and was like, damn it. I'm just disappointed. All right. Lucas, Esper, Berthude, Simic Ramp. 28 lands. 1 Gilded Goose, 1 Quasi-Duplicate. So that's the differential between him and Manguchi, I guess.
Yeah.
And then
we said our piece.
Different sideboard,
the
maybe.
Setup looks good.
Yeah. All right. I'm rooting for Lucas and not Manguchi. I want Lucas to make my Cavaliers go up.
Okay. As long as someone does it, that's all I care about.
I just like Lucas. How do you not like Lucas, you know?
I like Lucas as well. I am rooting for both players who have chosen a very awesome deck. They can share my rooting interest equally.
All right, fair enough. Next up, Luis Salvato, Sultai Ramp. This is the Circuitous Route Casualties of War double Dimir Guildgate deck.
Yep. Yeah, Luis was the first person I saw talk about this deck on his Twitter feed. It looks cool. We'll see if it gets the job done. Everything remains from our last discussion of it.
Yep. Marcelino Freeman's Jeskai Fires, 4 Fae of Wishes, 3 Sphinx of Foresight, 4 War Boss, 2 Sorcerer Spyglass in the sideboard, and then all 1-ofs.
Same as the other Fires list. Next.
1 Justice Strike, though. Next up, Marcio Carvalho, John Sack, 25 lands, 2 District Guide. Okay, so maybe that was not a Bastos thing. It was a Marcio thing.
Okay, people coming around to that way of thinking. Interesting approach.
Mono 3-drops. Golgari Sacrifice from Martin Yuza, friend of the cast. 4 Cauldron Familiar, interesting. 4 Midnight Reaper, 3 Wicked Wolf, a Massacre Girl of Vraska, 2 Casualties, 1 Bolus Citadel. I like that.
Yeah, I haven't seen much of that card in this archetype, but it seems strong.
And another in the board, too.
What do you think about what Martin's doing here? Because it seems to me like we're not even trying to get to that huge top end that a lot of people shifted to green-black for. There's only 2 copies of Casualty of War. There's the 1 Bolus's Citadel. I am interested as to how he arrived at this particular deck list. It seems like an approach that is leaning really hard on Midnight Reaper more than other green-black lists I've seen, maybe.
Yeah, agreed. That's kind of like the antithesis to Martin's approach. Like, if mono red is decent, he'll play like big red Eldrazi or whatever, you know? Like, he was one of the people who popularized the Jeskai Fires deck, for example. Like, he loves doing like the big splashy things, and he's kind of doing some of it here with Casualties and Bolas' Citadel, but like this is a much leaner deck list than I would expect from Martin.
Yeah, I'm a little struck by it. Abstractly, not the biggest fan. I know Martin to be very thoughtful with all of his choices. I'm very curious as to how we ended up on this particular list. I'm sure he will tell the story at some point.
Yeah, 2 duress, no drill bit. I'm off it. Next deck, Matt Nass, Jeskai Fires, 27 land, all normal stuff.
Yeah, nothing interesting.
2 Ether Gust, 1 Justice Strike. Cool, dude. Hope you win. Miguel Guerrero Leon, Temur Reclamation. Frilled Mystic. I like that.
Yeah, I at least like that card. 4 Escape to the Wilds.
Yeah. Well, that's like the Chris Botello version.
Okay.
Chris was playing a ton of Escape. I don't remember him ever having Frilled Mystic, but...
All right. It's not enough to make me not hate this deck, but there are at least better cards here.
Yep. Miguel, the Cruz Samoas, Jund's Sacrifice, 3 Brontodon, love it. Wicked Wolf, pretty sure that card's medium. Again, 2 District Guides, so I don't know. Maybe working with Marcia.
Yeah, seems like it.
Mike Sigrist, Jeskai Fires. Why, Siggy? Why would you do this to yourself? Playing the same deck as Madnass.
Yep, same list, same 75 as far as I can tell.
Mimi Arthur, Golgari Adventures, same deck as Autumn and Alley.
Looks good.
Clover, let's get it. Paulo Vitor Domoderosa, Jeskai Fires, same as Nass and Siggy. Cool. Another Jeskai Fires, Pierre Velo. 3 Sphinx of Foresight. Why?
Play the full 4. Get your fires on time. That's how you win games. 6 sweepers here. Probably unnecessary given this field.
Ooh, I like this, though. 2 Gadwicks in the sideboard. That's probably pretty nice.
Okay. A little capacity to go big.
And a Crush Contraband, sure.
Gonna have to look at that card because I don't know what it is.
4 mana, disenchanted, 1 of each.
I don't know if that's what we're looking for here.
I mean, it's not great, but it's a Magic card.
That is true. I will not take that away from you.
Pearson Laughlin, Golgari Sacrifice, 25 land, 2 Midnight Reaper, 3 Brontodon, 2 Vraska, 4 Casualties, 1 Massacre Girl. Really not messing around as far as like the Brontodons and Casualties are concerned, so I do like that aspect. Sideboard has 4 Rotting Regisaur and 3 Shifting Ceratops, so like definitely
cool.
has the ability to shift gears, which is sweet.
Yeah, I like that.
So yeah, I mean, this list is solid. I'm not mad at this list other than Duress instead of Drill Bit and the Massacre Girl main.
Yeah, doing a good job with a change 'em up sideboard plan. I think that's important. And we know the stock version of this deck is fine. It's fine. It's going to not blow away the field, but I like having a little wrinkle in the sideboard.
Next up, Canister. Piotr Glogovsky, Jund's Sacrifice, Beanstalk Giant instead of Paradise Druid. Tell me all about it.
Yeah, so like I said, Paradise Druid, a bit of a liability in a bunch of spots, especially now when we're dealing with like a post-planner cleansing world where that's another card you have to account for. Being able to make sure you are ramping without having to put your creatures on the battlefield can be very, very impactful when opponents are accounting for what you're doing now. And I think this is just going to guarantee the ability to cast those 4 Casualties of War. And when you're committing that hard, make damn sure you're going to cast them. Canister has done a nice job of doing that with the 3 Beanstalk Giant. And I do think like it being a threat that is just going to sit in exile forever will come up quite often. You need closing power in some spots. Usually you have an engine going. As people have gotten better at dealing with your engines, sometimes you just need that last haymaker to put you over the edge. Beanstalk Giant can fill that role as well. So this seems like a nice approach to the Jund list. It has your boy Deathless Knight hanging out in the sideboard there too.
I do like that card, and I've seen a few people with this in their sideboard. I'm not a really big fan of it though.
What do you think about it against just like Blue-White Control? It seems like a nice little change up there.
Yeah, I mean, it's fine. I'm not sure if it's better than even a Ceratops would be, but maybe it is.
Okay.
I feel like their job is to just blow up all your stuff anyway, and then you're not really going to have stuff to gain life to return the night, but I don't know. Mysteries.
Rip that Cauldron Familiar off the top.
Oh, yeah. Raymond Nevison, Simic Flash. This is classic version of the deck, although it does still have Growth Spiral and 3 copies of Nissa, 25 land. Gilded Goose, too. So, yeah, maybe not that normal. Yeah,
finding different ways to accelerate, which makes sense. I think that's important for this archetype. And Raymond Nevison finds himself in very, very good company alongside people who have chosen to play Simic Flash in this tournament. So maybe they're onto something.
Yeah, I'm kind of about this. Brineborn Cutthroat, I mean, Raymond cut one of them. It feels like he's well on his way to just cutting all of them, because there's 13 instants and then obviously the flash creatures count, but it's like not really what you want to be doing on turn 2 with this deck. So yeah, maybe it's time to move away from that card.
Could be.
Ray Sato, Jeskai Fires, all 4 ofs on the creatures except for 2 Kenriths, 3 Teferi Time Raveler. I'm not sure I buy that. And a Prison Realm with Solar Blaze, Deafening Clarion. Sideboard has 3 Tithe Takers. Cool.
Still fires. Nothing exciting to report on.
Next up, Reed Duke, Golgari Adventure, 3 Lucky Clover, 4 Casualties of War, 4 Beanstalk Giants. So Reed going pretty heavy, actually.
I like the top end in Reed's deck. 1 Liliana Dreadhorde General, 1 Fine Finality. It seems like those will be very helpful in playing these longer games that this deck will probably get priced into in a lot of instances. And a way to leverage mana that you're getting from Beanstalk Giant as well. Playing those cards ahead of time can often be quite impactful. So nice little grabs here from Reed on the top end. Some one-ofs. I think Fine Finality is a good one-of too in that mode of your opponent has to account for it. Assuming there were decks that were like trying to go super wide. There basically aren't, but it'll still be a decision point for people to account for as these games are played.
Yeah, I also like the fact that Reed is playing 3 Castle Locthwain.
Yeah. Important source of card advantage for sure.
And this is a deck where I actually approve of Duress instead of Drill Bit because there's no like Smitten Swordmaster or Cauldron Familiar or anything like that to actually get in chip damage.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that seems like the big difference from Reed's list versus the other Golgari Adventure Lucky Clover builds that are floating around, the exclusion of Smitten Swordmaster.
Yep. Ronald Mueller, Jeskai Fires, normal AF.
Yup.
Seth Manfield, Simic Flash, same as Brad and Javier.
Yep.
Shahar Shenhar, Izzet Flash, same as Cuneo and Nassif.
Correct.
Also no Neheb, so interesting. The plot thickens.
I don't know. Maybe this story is starting to gain some credibility.
Oh my word. Shota Yasoka, 5-color fires. It's like Ken's deck, except it has Golos instead of Niv Mizzet?
Yeah. I mean, this is wild. This is a wild deck. I don't even know how good Golos is here. I'm sure it's fine. It's hard for Golos to be bad. You will get plenty of activations, and you were already doing stuff with your mana base anyway to account for like being able to use Kenrith really effectively. So is it worth stretching your mana this far? I have no idea. But you're Beanstalk Giant in anyway, so maybe it's enough.
Well, if the alternative is Niv, I mean, it's kind of the same thing, except like Golos helps you fix. It is worth noting that this deck is labeled as 60-15, but Golos is in artifacts and creatures. I'm not sure if those numbers add up.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Yeah, it just has Golos listed twice.
It's 64 cards.
I was wondering if there's like Escape to the Wilds or whatever, but yeah, Golos Fires of Invention is like another one of those things where it's like kind of a combo, but not really.
Right. Oh, we certainly saw those cards played in conjunction with one another, and you know how powerful it is to just put a Golos on the battlefield and immediately activate. So,
yeah, that's certainly true. Simone Rakudo, Simic Ramp, Cavalier of Thorns, Agent of Treachery, Voracious Hydra, a couple Incubation Incongruities, a Return to Nature, a Mass Manip, 2 Quasi-Duplicates. Like, this deck is kind of wild, but way more creature-heavy than Menguchi's version.
Mm-hmm. Missing that Finale of Devastation endgame, unfortunately. And I do think that is like a really big breakthrough point for this archetype.
Yeah, instead playing a little bit more of a small ball game plan with Voracious Hydras. And I feel like that is just not going to get the job done a lot of the time. Like, this deck is going to be able to stabilize behind Cavalier of Thorns, but then maybe not really be able to convert that. So it's definitely an issue.
Yeah, I could see them having trouble closing games against particularly Cat Oven decks.
Ooh, okay. The plot thickens even more. Stanislav Sivka, Golgari Sacrifice, 2 casualties, 1 Bolas' Citadel. I'm on to you, Martin Juza.
Okay. Something going on here.
I feel like Martin just went with the check house, you know?
It's been
that's why his deck is so lean.
Very good strategy as of late. So I can't fault him for taking that approach.
Yeah, and then we have Stephen Croak, aka Croaky's 3 Cauldron Familiar, 4 Casualties of War. I mean, he's been streaming this deck a ton, right? And like was pretty upfront about everything that was going on and what he was doing. So
yeah, and props to him for taking that approach, being super loyal to his viewer base, and certainly rooting for Croaky to have a nice performance at this PT.
Same, respect. So 3 Cauldron Familiar likely came from him then.
Could be.
That would just be my guess. Rakdos Sacrifice from Teruya Kakume. This is Cauldron Familiar, Witch's Oven, Mayhem Devil, but also Stormfist Crusader, Rixmati Reveler, Claim the Firstborn, 4 Rankle, no Angrass Rampage or any of that nonsense. So I like this take. This like Stormfist Crusader is a little bit more aggressive, and I feel like that is basically what this deck needs.
Right. Yeah, slanting a little bit more aggressive, I think, is the way to go for Rakdos Sacrifice, because you're not going to be occupying the mid and late game as well as the other Cat Oven decks can. And now that there's decks designed to go over top of even those, I think it's a really bad position to put yourself in to rely on your somewhat more mediocre engine. You just got to get your opponent dead. This'll do the job in a lot of instances.
Sideboard 4 Rotting Regisaur, 3 Duress, and 2 Drill Bit. Loved it.
So easy to please Gerry these days. Just put a drill bit in your deck. He'll be very happy.
Yeah, pretty much. Teo Mautier, Golgari Sacrifice, 26 land. I like that. 3 Casualties, 3 Cauldron Familiar, so pretty similar to Croaky's.
Yep, nothing to really report on here. Pretty stock.
More Deathless Knights. Tien Fa Moon, Jeskai Fires. Normal.
Next.
We only have 1 deck left.
Oh, still next. I have nothing to say about Jeskai Fires anymore. I've said my piece.
William Jensen, Izzet Flash, 2 Skargan Hellkites in the board, no Nehebs.
I just don't know. We have to get to the bottom of the Neheb situation. I mean, I've played that card before. It's fine-ish, sort of, kind of.
Seems pretty bad.
I don't know. I mean, it's hard to believe it was the best possible option when you look at all the sideboard cards available to you, but maybe there's something going on that I just don't know about. Regardless.
So here's the question. If Cuneo did actually misclick, which I don't believe he did, but if he did, do you ever board the card in?
It's totally possible you could find a spot where it's good. I mean, once you're committed, you may as well figure out, can I get some value out of this card in any spots? Yeah, this is a wild story. I don't know what to make of this. I have a feeling we will see Neheb on the battlefield at some point if we get to watch a lot of Cuneo games.
He's trolling. He's going to side in against everyone. It's probably going to be
just
bad.
Always there. Love it.
But that's it. Did we even take questions this week?
No, we didn't take any questions, Gerry. Find a question. I mean, just see what people are talking about. We'll talk about that. I didn't even think about it being in London. So
yeah, I didn't think about it either until just right now.
Maybe there's a question that's been languishing in the channel for a while that we should be talking about.
I mean, there are 5 questions, but I'm not going to reward the people for asking questions outside of normal.
Okay. I respect that. You know, I have this issue with my wife where obviously I love pizza. I eat pizza quite often. And every time we get pizza, my dog just goes berserk. He's like, and he's a very well-trained dog. He generally like respects when people are eating. He shouldn't be bothering them. But if you're eating pizza, he very quietly and respectfully sits next to you and just stares at you the entire time. And only with pizza does he do this. But my wife has also given him her pizza crust basically since he's been a puppy. But she'll still yell at him and be like, Kai, you can't be here. Go lay down. And I'm like, you've given him every pizza crust ever. Why would he not be here expecting that you would do it one more time? So this is exactly that principle. We can't reward these questions. You have to ask them at the prescripted time, even if we're too stupid to ask them when we're supposed to.
Okay. I like that. I feel like that is a good way to close the podcast.
That's it? That's game?
That's game.
Good luck.